good times. There's gonna be good times, good times.
Hello, and welcome to Good Times Podcast. Today's topic is on inequalities in markets. As a group, we were inspired by a collective observation of a particular hiring trend in the restaurant industry. We noticed that in a general sense, restaurants seem to have female employees working the front of the house, while male employees worked in the kitchen and dish pit. But why is this so? How does gender within the restaurant industry affect the way managers hire employees? Is it relatable to Lauren Rivera's observation of hiring certain employees as a cultural match? Are restaurant owners making a conscious business decision by appealing to restaurant patrons' implicit biases and first impressions? We interviewed a restaurant employee and a couple that are restaurant owners to further explore our observed inequality and to get some more insight on how the restaurant industry works. To start this podcast off, we will be interviewing a 23-year-old male who worked at a high-end restaurant in downtown Seattle. How old are you? How long have you been working in the restaurant industry, and what kind of restaurant have you worked at?
I'm 23 years old. I've worked at my parents' bakery pretty much since before I could walk. Actually started legally working there on the payroll when I was 15, I think. And I'm still working there now. Wahoo! But then for 8 months in the spring and summer of 2014, I worked at the Dahlia Lounge in downtown Seattle, which is a legit, really fancy, fast-paced restaurant.
What kind of patrons would you say frequented this Dahlia Lounge, or what was the atmosphere like?
So I worked brunch. So a lot of people were coming for a post-church kind of thing. So that kind of changes the demographic a little bit. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's a fancy restaurant. You're paying at least $20 for a plate of food. So you throw drinks and apps on that, then it gets really expensive. So the people, a lot of times on a Sunday brunch, people are wearing ties. People look nice. For the most part, yeah, people definitely a way more high type eatery than the bakery is. That's for sure.
So for people that haven't worked in the restaurant industry or are not familiar with it, what's the typical hiring process like for someone that wants to work in the restaurant industry?
I'm not exactly sure what the typical hiring process would be. Since for the bakery, I wasn't really hired, it was my parents. But for the Dahlia, it was really kind of spur of the moment. For me, they needed someone to fill a position quickly, so I filled out a real basic app on Husky Jobs, and the chef called me a couple weeks later and was like, "Come on down," and I came on down, and my first day there, I was working. Okay. So actually really informal, surprisingly informal.
For how formal of a restaurant?
Right, exactly, yeah.
So our research question is, how does gender within the restaurant industry affect the way managers hire employees? In your experience, have you noticed a gender inequality when it comes to getting hired as front of house or back of house?
Right, so that research question and that framework is definitely kind of how I would think about it if I was thinking about it generally. But from my actual experience at the Dahlia, there wasn't really any separation. The crew who worked the front of house was pretty split straight down the middle as far as gender goes, and also as far as sexuality goes. Also, it didn't really matter at all. Mm-hmm. And then the same for the back of the house. At least for the line. In my opinion, the best cook on the line was a woman. She made me dinner every night, and it was bomb. I guess the only thing then is though that there were no women working back in the dish pit. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's because maybe women might be smart enough to know that it sucks in the dish pit, yeah. But then this isn't necessarily my opinion, but that job is also it's a way more physically demanding job. So an employer might either consciously or subconsciously move towards hiring a man in the dish pit area. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but generally speaking, no, it seemed pretty straight up. Tom Douglas is a great employer. He's a good guy, and he makes sure that his work environments and his employees are taken care of, I think.
So how does the type or quality of restaurant affect hiring? Do managers try to culturally fit specific genders or specific races for a certain position that might relate to the vibe of their restaurant?
I never really thought about that. I think that could definitely be true, especially because there's a wide variety of restaurants. I mean, like if it's a vegan place, you don't want a dude wearing like a eat more bacon shirt, right?
Exactly.
But like at the in my experience at the Dahlia, I don't think so. Because I consider that. I mean, I'm biased, but that's one of the nicest restaurants in Seattle, I think. And as far as like caliber of restaurant in conjunction with their hiring processes, and no, I mean he just hires who's ever qualified and whoever not based off on anything else. At least from my perspective, like both in front of house and back of house, excluding the dishwashers, like the cooks. It was super diverse. I mean, like sometimes we had sous chefs change, not during the shift, but like from Saturday to Sunday, it'd be a different person. Actually, that's how it was. But on Saturdays it was Brock, was this dude, and then on Sundays it was Sabrina, and they were both like equal levels of intense sous chefs. I mean, one was man, one was woman, and then so I don't know if that gender equality and diversification, is that a word? Is a goal of the restaurant, but it just happens.
Okay.
And it ends up making a pretty cool work environment.
Now that you've heard from someone that's worked at a restaurant, it's time to get some insight from actual restaurant owners. The owners that we interviewed are actually the parents of one of our group members. They don't speak English very well, so we have translated their answers for your viewing and listening pleasure.
How long have you owned your restaurant?
We have owned the restaurant for over 15 years.
What kind of restaurant do you run?
We run a Korean, Japanese, teriyaki, and sushi restaurant.
How many workers do you currently have?
We currently have 2 workers, excluding my husband and I.
What is your typical hiring process? What do you look for in an employee? Is qualification and past experience more important than gender or race?
Our typical hiring process is that we look for younger workers. We look for people who seem tough enough to handle the stress of being a waitress. Past experience is important to us, but is just as equal as gender. We will hire any race.
Do you look for a specific gender when looking for employees for the front and back of house? If so, could you elaborate on why you prefer one gender over the other?
We only hire females as our waitresses because we just prefer females. We believe that they have better charm among the customers, and I prefer spending time with females. They typically do a better job than our past male employees. It is just my husband and myself that works in the back of the house. We don't have any other workers for the kitchen.
Do you feel like there's pressure through societal norms to hire a certain gender or kind of person for different positions? For example, first impressions via implicit bias determining who works front of house?
No, I think it depends on the employers. We have a different hiring process than our relatives who do the same business as us. We are a little bit more selective. After conducting our interviews, we concluded that there doesn't seem to be a strong connection between gender and the way restaurant managers decide to hire for the front or back of the house. It seems like managers tend to hire employees based on a candidate's ability to meet required tasks for the position that they are applying for and what their past experience is like. But our research does not verify that there isn't gender inequality within the restaurant industry. I think it's safe to say that there are places around the country that do hire employees based on gender and whether or not a candidate is culturally fit. To further validate and strengthen our project, future research will include interviews with a female employee, managers of different kinds of restaurants, managers of restaurants located in liberal versus conservative towns, and more. Thank you for joining today's segment of Good Times Podcast.
Good times. There's gonna be good times. Good times. Got no job.